Hi, good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Wellness at Work. My apologies, I started to read the wrong script. Give me 2 seconds. Stuck in the middle navigating supervision from all directions. Today's webinar is sponsored by Glukuho Contemporaries Committee. My name is Jeremy Alexander. I'm the Glukuho Technology Coordinator, and I'm hosted at Eastern Illinois University. I'll serve as your webinar moderator today. Before we begin the webinar, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items with you to help to maximize your learning from the session. You'd want to leave the GoToWebinar control box at the far right of your screen. This is most likely where it opened when you joined the webinar. To ask questions, type in the chat box, which will remain open for the entire presentation. The presenters will answer questions as quickly as possible, but we want to ensure that we give enough time to cover all the materials. Should you experience any problems, please type in the chat box and we'll work to assist you. At the end of the presentation, the presentation recording and audio recording will be available on our website at glukuho.org under Webinar Archives in the Resource section for your future reference. We encourage you to share this resource with your colleagues and friends who were unable to attend the webinar today. At this time, I'll hand it over to Crystal Kitten from the Glukuho Health Contemporary Issues Committee.
Hi, my name is Crystal Kitten. I am the Contemporary Issues Chair for this year for Glukuho. Today we are going to be hearing from Dr. Shruti Desai. She is going to be our Contemporary Issues expert this year in supervision and management and housing. To hear more from Dr. Shruti Desai, you can come to the Glukuho Annual Conference, October 27th through the 30th in Bloomington, Indiana. I'd like to take this time to introduce our presenters today. Dr. Shruti Desai serves as Assistant Vice President at McKendree University in Lebanon, Illinois. Shruti's research examines resilience in women of color in senior student affairs officer roles. Prior to joining McKendree, Shruti has professional roles in residence life at Washington University in St. Louis, the University of Kansas, and Texas Tech University. Shruti has worked to lead systematic change for LGBT and individuals of color for students and professional staff. Shruti presents regionally and nationally on identity-conscious supervision, creating supportive cultures for marginalized identities, building a culture of assessment, and resilience. Shruti is an alumnus of the Social Justice Training Institute, as well as a past faculty and intern with SJTI. Her passion lies around getting beyond a false binary of race in America, examining identity as intersections of power and privilege, and data as storytelling. Shruti has received numerous awards, including NASPA's Asian Pacific Islander Knowledge Community Mid-Level Professional of the Year, as well as the James R. Harbaugh Award for Outstanding Service to the LGBT community and Advisor of the Year. Shruti is a member of the NASPA Supporting, Expanding, and Recruiting Volunteer Excellence Academy and the ACPA External Advisory Board. Shruti holds a BA in Psychology from Mercer University, an M.Ed. in College Student Affairs Administration from the University of Georgia, and an EDD in Higher Education Leadership from Maryville University. Shruti lives in St. Louis with her incredible wife and their zoo of 2 dogs and a cat. Also joining us is Dr. Craig Elliott. He serves as the Assistant Vice President of Enrollment and Student Services and Assistant Professor at Samuel Merritt University in Oakland, California. Craig has presented numerous programs at the local and national level on equity, inclusion, and social justice and leadership, and has served in a variety of leadership capacities. Notably, Craig has been elected to the Vice President position for ACPA for 2018-2019. He previously served as President of the California College Personnel Association. He chaired the Inclusion Task Force for ACPA, served as one of the co-chairs for the Equity and Inclusion Advisory Committee, served on the National Convention planning teams, and serves on the Foundation Board and its Director of External Relations. He's also served NASPA NCORE from 2012 and 2014 and served on boards for World Trust. He's a Social Justice Institute alumnus, serves on the faculty with student SJTI, and is a co-lead facilitator for the Leadership Institute. Craig's research interests explore white caucus work, feminism, and masculinity. the intersection of transformative leadership or learning and social justice work, inclusion and equity, institutional change, and dismantling white supremacy. Craig is part of the editorial collective for Rad Dad, a zine on feminist and social justice parenting, which has published 3 anthologies. Craig also serves his local community in scouting, coaching soccer, and serving on the board for the local food bank. He's been married for over 20 years to Nicole and his father to Jackson and Thomas. He loves soccer, art, music, time with his family, and really good, strong coffee. All right, now it is time to hear from our presenters.
So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Just thrilled to have you all here and joining us today to talk about kind of stuck in the middle about supervision and managing up and sideways and down, and just kind of reconciling the strange experiences that come with being middle management, and how that works within an organization, and how to really find ways to transcend the role and really create change and create good, strong teams, and do that in socially just ways. So we're thrilled that you're all here with us, and thank you for listening to our long intros. Both Shruti and I were like, wow, it's so funny to hear somebody else read our stuff, and but Shruti, I did love how, like, right after you were introduced about going to Kansas, that you took a sip from your Jayhawk.
I planned that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So just Shruti, if you can go to the next slide, just to show. I mean, that's.
Hold on. Yep. There you go.
There you go. And more about our information, and who we are. I think just to briefly, what we want to do is we'll do a bit of an introduction, talk about why this topic is important to us.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, my name is Craig, and my pronouns are he, him, his. And as it says there, I'm an assistant VP for Enrollment Student Services, and I've been at Samuel Merritt University 16 years. And I think one of the things that why this topic is really important to me is that I feel like I didn't get much training or education about what it meant to be a supervisor, and I feel like I had to learn the hard way. And I made a whole bunch of mistakes. But along the way, I've found some things that I think have really worked and help create strong teams, to where these teams are really functioning well, sometimes in spite of the environment or the institution that we're working in. And so for me, this is a way to help. How do we help inspire each other to build kind of beyond our department? That I'm always looking for. How do we create opportunities for institutional change?
Yeah, so my name is Shruti Desai. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I serve as Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs at McKendree University. It's a small school outside of St. Louis, but in Illinois, so in the Gluckville region. And I'm having some allergy issues, so I apologize. I have worked predominantly in residential life at various universities, and so that's my love and passion for Gluckville and Akuho. And I think we have, right out of the gate, we have an opportunity to supervise in res life, and we don't often talk about it in graduate prep programs or as grad students, how to supervise, what does supervision mean? And oftentimes when I am frustrated at work, it's because I'm frustrated with my supervisor or the team that I'm working with. It's, something just didn't go our way. And I think sometimes we forget that supervision is a relationship, just like any other relationship. It requires a lot of work. It's ups and downs, it's hard conversations. And so I think managing from the middle brings a different or kind of set of challenges. We all have supervisors, and so Craig and I are excited to spend some time talking about the chaos that sometimes is supervision, as well as the beauty that can be supervision. Okay, so we want to spend some time defining middle management, and I don't know about y'all, but more often than not, I go home and this is what I feel like, oh, I don't know what happened today, but I thought my job was cool, but I'm not sure. And so we thought this comic was appropriate. So middle management, most of us are in middle management roles, right? It includes assistant directors, it includes associate directors, it includes hall directors. Craig and I are both in middle management. We have supervisors and we supervise. We have colleagues, and just there's a lot of people vying for our attention and our time. We have a little bit of power, but not all the power. We have a little bit of knowledge, but not all the knowledge. So sometimes in middle management, it feels like, am I being set up for failure, or is this just how middle management is? I think for all of our sanity, that's just how middle management is. So a couple of definitions on what middle management is. So there's 3 different kind of research spots that discuss middle management. The first is a general manager who's responsible for a particular unit. So you can think about an assistant director of operations or an assistant director of conduct, and kind of in that intermediate level. My role, I'm responsible for res life and counseling and health services. So I have some responsibility without the big general responsibility. It's kind of the person who knows what the higher ups want, but also has some street cred with the hall director staff or newer professionals or the student staff. It's a smaller group of individuals, so as the hierarchy goes up, the group of people in those positions goes down. But it's often above that like intermediate, that entry level space of supervision. This person plays a lot of roles. They pivot between what the kind of senior folks want, and they pivot between what the students want or what the entry level staff wants. So it's really a political position that's navigating a lot of demands and responsibilities. So sometimes, you know, one of the things that happened recently is our vice president came to me, and due to some budget cuts, we didn't have anyone running Greek life. And she said, Shruti, I want res life to take on Greek life. And I was like, oh, our director of res life is not going to be happy with this. But I had a demand from my supervisor and I needed to make it work. And I also knew my team well enough to know that this was not going to be an ideal conversation. And I had to think about strategies of what other colleagues do I have that could take this on? What other options do we have? But I think middle management, we spend more time solving problems and kind of supervising up and supervising down and across to figure out what's a better option or what's a different option. And I think that's part of the beauty of middle management is we have a lot of voices in our head telling us a lot of things. And that sometimes can feel like restlessness, but oftentimes middle managers have information that helps us make better decisions than kind of the folks above us or the folks below us. Anything to add, Craig?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay, I will take us to the next slide.
Excellent. So I think one of the things we know that this role is crucial. Our roles within the organization are crucial. And as Shruti talked about that, wow, my light sensor dropped off. It's crucial. As Shruti talked about that, we're often problem solvers and we're getting stuff done, and lots of spaces to where people are entrusting us to solve problems and make a difference, and they count on us to make things happen in the way. Mm-hmm. And you know, we're often I feel like that we're the bridge between this kind of 30,000-foot strategic level that the board of regents or trustees and the president's leadership team is on, and then kind of frontline staff. And so we're really trying to bridge kind of some of that strategic work, and we understand we're brought into awareness of those initiatives, but those don't always translate to the ground level. So one of the things that I had to learn the hard way was really managing my ego. And I have Yoda there, I'm a Star Wars nerd, but that idea that the quote there, that fear is the path to the dark side, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering, and that is all about ego. And I very much remember being in my ego younger in my career, and there are still moments that I get stuck there. So it's I'm grateful for my friends to talk me off the cliff, but our ego is the part of us that defines our personality, and that it is about our sense of being and our sense of self and how we've really constructed who we are as a professional on our campus and the work that we do. And I don't want to get into Freud's version of but it's really that part where we speak about ourselves. It's I did this, I did that, my staff, my team, my project. And some of that's good, that we're taking ownership and we take responsibility and we work with others to be able to do that. But there's also this really dark side of our ego where we continue to hold on to our part in it rather than our connection to the bigger world. And one of the things that took me a while to figure out is that we serve students, but we work for the university. Mm-hmm. So those things aren't always in alignment. And so being able to translate or code shift between when we're serving, or the spaces where we're serving, and then how we're an agent of the university and the organization, and how we are a part of a bigger machine. So my story that I had about this, it's pretty funny that I now, but it certainly wasn't that funny at the time. I started off, so I'm very proud about the work that I do, and especially in residence life. My time there was that I created educational learning communities and really spent a lot of time investing in preventative relationship and boundary building, so to try to minimize conduct. And I felt like I had a really good sense of the pulse of the institutions when I was working. And there was a time where our president made a decision to close one of our residence halls. And I was pretty frustrated about that, to be honest. And so we're a small enough school that I expressed my frustration to the vice president who I supervised. But then I had an opportunity to have a conversation with the president, and I expressed my frustration to her. And I said, do you not understand what our students need? And I laugh now because just the arrogance and the entitlement that I had to even say that to the president. But I'm grateful for the conversation that we had, because one of the things she shared with me is that there are things that she knows that I don't know, and she can't tell me, just because of how the organization works and privacy and confidentiality and whatnot. And so our conversation was about that. While she understood where I was coming from and that she had students' best interests in mind, that there were other factors at play that I wasn't aware of. And because of my role, I wasn't able to see them. And so those are some things that she was having to contend with to make a good decision for the institution, not just for students, but for the institution. And so it was really, and I still don't know what those factors are. So but it was an interesting moment to be able to say, oh, I may not always be seeing what's up there. And so I think that tying back to what Shruti said about relationships is really building good, strong relationships with your supervisors, to be able to trust them, so that you don't have to, certainly that you can express your feelings and frustrations about the impacts of things, but that you can trust them that they are doing the best that they can to try to make a difference for the institution. if you can't quite trust them, that at least you're recognizing that there are other elements and other energies happening in an institution that are driving those decisions that you may not be able to see. So in summary, I think it's the first thing. It's not about you. Is one of the things I had to learn. Like, the world does not center on Craig Elliott at my institution, as much as I want it to be. I do feel like I'm an important part of that, but it isn't about me. And I think the second thing is that when I'm feeling like it's about me, I'm not paying attention to the work of my team, or I'm not centering the work of my team. And oftentimes, and I know this very much, that it is the team that makes all of us successful, not me. And I could not do it all, and I wouldn't want to do it all. And so it's really, I try to remind myself that how do I keep the focus and the celebration on the great work that the team is doing. And I know that I will be wrapped up in I know that people know that I'm a part of that, but I don't need to be the one to say, yeah, it was me. I think related to that is also that what we want to celebrate our team's efforts in public and really allow others to shine. And when there's mistakes or when things go wrong, that's our job to really step in front of that. And in public, to take ownership and responsibility for things not going well. And then if there are others involved in that, then we have those conversations in private and coach and help other people, help our team members improve. But it really is about us centering around the team and promoting their great work that make things happen. The second thing, or the third thing, is to take initiative. There was a time where I was waiting for others to give me direction, and in that weird place between strategy and ground level, I was waiting for somebody to say, go do this. And so one of the things that I learned that is difficult about middle management is really that you have to have a connection to the strategy and know where the institution is going, but know what needs to be done out of that before anybody tells you. Because your staff needs direction, and your team needs direction, and you are the one in the organization to be able to provide that. So that initiative is really important. And I think in terms of, it also showed, like, when your team sees and when your supervisor sees that you're willing to jump in and roll up your sleeves to get things done that need to get done, that speaks volumes about your integrity and your ethics and your value to the organization. The fourth thing is ask questions. This one was hard for me, very much about how we're taught about masculinity and whiteness. Really has, like, we have to be perfect, and we can't ask questions, and we have to always show competence. And that has been my downfall more times than not, about really being in confidence, say, I got this, and really, like, I have questions, but I'm afraid to ask them because that's not what I've been trained to do. And so really my own practice has really been ask more questions, and so that I can understand things and make sure that I can lead in the way that is best for the organization and for our division and for the team and for the students. But I'm not stuck in my ego trying to show that I know everything. And I don't need to know everything. And I think just the last thing with that, be imperfect. Celebrate your imperfection. Yeah. And as I'm practicing being a leader and a supervisor, I'm trying to also communicate that to my team. That I want you to be excellent, not perfect.
Just a quick add on that. I think a lot of this too is tied into self-worth and value. When you value yourself outside of your job, you're able to take initiative, you're able to be imperfect. When I'm spending more time worrying about me going to the gym or kind of how I feel about myself, I don't spend as much time worrying about what everyone else around me is doing. And so I think it's this balance of managing your ego while you value who you are and have confidence in your skills that allow you to do some of this.
Great, Ed. Thank you.
Yeah. You good? Okay. So I get the pleasure of having 2 dogs at home. And if you know anything about dogs, when they lay like this, we also have a cat, but she's a little wild. But when your dogs lay like this, it's like the most vulnerable spot they can be in. They're showing you that they fully trust you and they want you to rub their belly. And so we thought this was a good image of what building trust looks like, is being really vulnerable, and how you do that when you're in the middle, when you have a supervisor, when you have staff asking you for stuff, when you have a supervisor asking you for stuff, when you have colleagues asking you for stuff. Building trust, I think sometimes in our fields means like doing more stuff, saying like, I've worked in departments where people are like, I got to 0 emails. I'm like, cool, I have 105. Like, I don't know what that means for our validity as professionals. And so building trust, and this comes from some of Brene Brown's work. I also think that, to Craig's point about identities, our identities, and I'm going to talk about this at Glokuho, so I do hope you come. Our identities impact who we trust. As a woman of color, I am more likely to trust people of color. I am more likely to trust women. Especially if you're a woman of color, I'm like, oh, I just met my best friend. We're going to hang out and really build trust more quickly, right? And so I think we have to account for that when we talk about trust as our identities and kind of the stuff people have gone through around identities and around who to trust, and make some space for that. I also think that it's important to know that it's a verb. Building is like you're building something. It doesn't happen overnight. And oftentimes supervisors have been in these positions longer than supervisees. So I think about some of the hall directors teams that I've worked in. Every 2 to 3 years, it was a revolving door. And I'm like, man, I've just worked so hard to build a relationship and build trust with this person, and now they're leaving. Often to like bigger and better things, and I celebrate that. But having some empathy with the supervisors and with the other people on campus who don't have kind of the rotation that entry-level people do in res life. It can be hard, it can be painful, and then every 2 to 3 years to be like, I have to be vulnerable again, I need to build trust again, takes some kind of confidence, and it's hard. So taking some empathy for that. So some of the things that we talk about when we talk about building trust is boundaries. You respect my boundaries, and when you're not clear about what's okay and what's okay, that's okay to ask. You have to be willing to say no. So back to this Greek life situation, when I took this to our director of res life and said, and she's on the call and she's amazing, so I just want to put that out there. When I took this to her, she said, Shruti, there's no way that my staff can do this. And I already knew that there was no way that her staff could do this. And so, but I went into this spiral of like, man, now I have to tell my boss that I can't, res life can't do Greek life. I'm going to lose my job. She's going to think I'm not competent, all of these things. And really that was not the story. And oftentimes I think what we do is we make up a like really shitty first draft of what is to come, right? That's full of our insecurities, that's full of our doubts, that's full of our vulnerable spots, that's full of our trauma. And so I had to go back to that and say like, no, she knows you're competent, she knows you're strong. You're just protecting your staff and you're setting a boundary. And that's okay, right? I am respected more because I was able to go to her and say, we can't do this, and here's why we can't do this. The second one is reliability. Say you do what you say you'll do, right? If I say I'm going to find a solution to us figuring out who's going to run, fraternity and sorority life, then I will find a solution to who will run fraternity and sorority life. But this also means that I need to be aware of my competencies, and I need to be aware of my colleagues' competencies and my team's competencies and limitations. So I can't go in there and say, yep, we're going to take on fraternity and sorority life, while also knowing that our res life team was down a staff member and overwhelmed. But once you commit to something, you're responsible for it, and you have to be reliable in that. In the small things and the big things, that's how you build trust. That's how you get additional responsibilities. That's how you get on additional committees or get to teach class, when you are reliable and you're showing up. There are a lot of opportunities, I think, in our work, and not every opportunity is good. And so you need to go back. Craig and I talk about this a lot of, I'm making this decision because it aligned with my values. I'm making this decision because it aligns with my strengths. If someone said to me, Shruti, you need to come in and do housing assignments, I'd be like, no, there's no way I'm doing housing assignments. My attention to detail is terrible. No, I'm not doing that. And I could commit to it and say, yeah, because my boss asked me this, it'll help me get a raise, it'll help me get a promotion. Or I could live my values and live to my strengths and say, no, that's just not something that you want me to do for the sake of our community, for the sake of our department. And if you are someone who says yes to everything, what does that mean for yourself, and how do you stay good at all those things that you've said yes to? Accountability, Craig touched on this a little bit, but owning your mistakes, apologizing and making amends. I've walked into my team's office all the time and say, like, I screwed that up and I'm sorry. That means it's a good role modeling for my team to then be able to come into my office and say, yeah, I screwed that up and I'm sorry. I've walked into my supervisor's office and said, like, yeah, I totally dropped the ball on this and I'm sorry. I think sometimes we forget about each other's humanity, and we make up, like, we can't fail, we can't do this, we can't do that. But I think my supervisor trusts me more because she knows that when I'm dropping the ball, that I'm going into her office and owning it before anyone's giving her a phone call. Vault. So I've worked in so many res life departments, and the gossip mill is something else. And it's not, if you're like, yeah, this is our department, it's not just your department. I think it's like something in student affairs where we just share. And information is power, right? And I think when all of us are functioning from, I don't feel valued, I don't feel trusted, or functioning from like shame and guilt, we use this as the way to feel valuable. And we use this as a way to feel important. But what I need more than anything is someone I can share something with and say, like, know that it's not going to come around. And this causes harm. I worked in a department where the RAs found out their supervisor was leaving before the supervisor even had an opportunity to talk to the staff. And that happened through the gossip mill. Anytime someone says, like, I need to tell you something, but you can't tell anyone else, you should assume that people already know. 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 people who shouldn't know already know. But you can't trust people who are going to spread your information, and you can't make decisions together in a supervisor-supervisee relationship. You know, oftentimes I'll talk with our counseling of like, oh, we need to get another staff member, here's what I'm working on. But if my assistant director of counseling then goes off and says to everyone, like, we're getting another counseling staff member, without that really happening, that makes our department and our division look like we have no clue what's going on. And instead we can come together and really have a solid decision and a solid plan and then announce it. And it sets us up, our staff up, our department up, our division up to be, to look more powerful, to look like we have a victory, and that we're working really hard to be advocates for our students. Integrity, you have to work from a function of integrity. You have to choose courage over comfort. It's easy for me to not bring up inclusion things when I'm talking to staff. It's easy for me to not interrupt a microaggression. It's easy for me to not tell my supervisor, like, oh, that was really problematic what you do, or to work with my staff and say, like, I think that's because you're white, and like, let's talk about what that means. But these are my values are that I am an advocate for diversity and social justice. And it's not comfortable, but it's courageous, and it's going to shift how we do work. The same thing comes when I am advocating for myself. My family is important to me, and so I'm going to live those values and live them with integrity. And so when I have to take a morning off, or when I take an afternoon leave early in the afternoon because I have family stuff going on, I don't feel shame or guilt about that. I'm not like checking my email for 2 more hours at home because I left an hour early. These are my values, and I'm living that with integrity. The next one is non-judgment. So I think this is the hardest one. I make up stories about things all the time. My partner and I were sitting at the park, and I'm like, what do you think their story is? And we make up this like entire story. And they're strangers, and they don't know that I'm making up a story about them. I still need to work on that. But when I do it in relationship with my supervisor, when I do it in relationship with my colleagues, when I do it really in relationship with the staff I'm working with, that's when it becomes dangerous. So you need to ask for what you need, and you can ask for that without judgment. And you want to create a relationship that your staff and your supervisor can do the same thing. I know my supervisor felt bad coming to me and saying, like, you got to take on Greek life. And I could have at that point made a decision that was like, you don't understand what we're doing. You don't know how hard our Res Life team works. I could have made up all these stories. But what I know is that she knows how hard we work and would do anything to try to get us another staff person. So instead of a place of judgment, I tried to function from a place of empathy and understand kind of what her story was. And again, back to that, like, and I say shitty first draft because that's Brene Brown's thing. Like, we make up a shitty first draft. Like, when my supervisor came to me and said, like, take on Greek life, my shitty first draft could have been like all of those things. But instead, I had to take a moment and breathe and think about, like, what's the counter story? What else could be happening in this situation? And what's coming up for me? I'm exhausted. It's the end of the year, and now you're asking me to take on one more thing. And that didn't feel, I could have worked from those emotions, but instead I had to say, like, those are my things. And that has nothing to do with the decision that she's asking me to do. And then generosity, like, what a shift it would be in our field, on our teams, if we just assumed that people are doing the best that they can. When I first started in my role, there were times that I was like, my supervisor's not advocating for us. She's not doing what she needs to be doing, blah, blah, all these things, right? Because what I saw was, like, her having a really good relationship with, and having been here for so long with our president and with other vice presidents. I wasn't generous. I was really judgmental, really critical. My ego got in the way of, like, I could be doing this better than you could. I couldn't. I don't want that her job. But how can I be more generous in the way that I approach her? And my first draft was all of those things that she's not advocating. And come to find out, she's had some challenging moments. And her voice isn't often heard on that panel, on that vice president's group, because she's a woman, or because they view her as emotional, or whatever. But I didn't know those things, and because I wasn't generous at first, I made up a judgment and a story about who she was and what she was and wasn't doing. So how do we extend the most generous intentions? And sometimes we don't know, right? Sometimes our supervisors don't tell us. Sometimes our colleagues don't tell us. Sometimes our staff doesn't tell us. And that, for me, when my staff doesn't feel comfortable telling me kind of, here's what's going on, or I'm not in a good place, or whatever, I look inward of, like, what have I done to create mistrust in this relationship? What have I done to create mistrust with my colleagues, with my supervisor? Because that's all I can control, is how I show up and what I do. So I think some things too in this is, if you're like, there's no way I can build trust, we're just not in an environment that's trustworthy, you have to know kind of when it's time to get out. Are there things that you can control that you haven't controlled, or is it just an environment that you are not going to be successful in, or that you can't live your values in, or you can't have integrity in? That's a conversation that you have to have with yourself and the people around you who you really trust as sounding boards. But I think when you do that, you should examine within, like, what's going on for me. Is it because I don't feel valued? Am I functioning from insecurity, or am I functioning from, like, being really valued and feeling whole and those kind of things? Oftentimes when my staff comes to me, I ask that they often have a solution, and so. But that's about trust, right? They know they can come to me and we'll talk through a solution. Oftentimes when they're frustrated with me, it's a conversation of, is there something we can do differently in the future? Or I am frustrated with them and I'm like, how do we fix this in the future? And that's a hard conversation, but we've worked really hard to build trust and have hard conversations. I think too, like if you're trying to build trust with those around you, don't wait till you're a breaking point to have a conversation. You trust, I mean, part of building trust is learning to trust yourself and your instincts. If your instincts and your trust and yourself are saying like something is not right, I think this person may not trust me, or I think one of my staff members is like struggling to feel valued by me, just put it on the table and have a conversation about it, right? But again, I think that involves identities. There's a study that Craig and I use often that says people of color value honesty before peace, and white folks value peace before honesty. So like white folks may really value that like feedback sandwich where it's like positive, critical, positive. And folks of color are just like, yeah, just tell me and I'll work through this and I'll figure out the relationship later. And so making sure you're doing work around that, like how do you like to be communicated with, and what if I have a concern with you, and taking that to your team. I think too, the other thing is like knowing what your problem is. Your problem yourself, or is it an entire team problem? Because sometimes people come into my office and they're like, everyone feels this way, and I'm like, who's everyone? And they name like 3 people. I'm like, bruh, there's like 3,000 people on campus. That's not everyone. So figuring out what the voices in your head are kind of is true and honest and valuable, and what other stuff you need to just let go. Any ads, Craig?
No ads, but I think you know, one of the things I loved that you said was that it's about us being the kind of people that we want to be in our institution, in the world. And so, like to paraphrase the Gandhi quote, you know, be the change you want to see, that we want to see. And so I think it's hard, but you know, showing up with integrity and non-judgment and generousness and love. Like how do you show up and spread that around in all directions as much as you can? So it was fantastic.
Cool, thanks.
We had a question from the audience, and is how do you recommend rebuilding trust with your supervisor once it has been lost?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think it's time and effort and intention. It's what we know from trust is that it's easy to build and it's easy to lose, but really hard to rebuild. So I think from my own experience about that is starts with me. So first step is really getting in touch with how I've let down myself and how I've let down the relationship. And then doing that work allows me then to know where those points are, and then be able to have a place to approach the other person and start rebuilding that. Sometimes you need help from others, but it really is, it's a process, and it's over time.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of hard conversations of, I know I've disappointed you, or I've betrayed you, or whatever it is. And how do we work together for us to get back to a place that you trust? What do you need from me? And aside from that, like you kind of, sometimes you know in relationships, like what this person needs for our trust to be rebuilt. So doing some of that without even being asked is really important. And sometimes it's a conversation of, can we even rebuild trust? Is that even on the table for us? Yeah. But I think Craig's absolutely right. It's coming from doing your own work first and then going from there.
Yeah. And I think, you may not be able to control whether that relationship's repairable or not. And that may mean certain things. But if you can reconcile it for yourself, and make those changes and adjustments and not kind of wallow in that place of I made a mistake, If you can make those changes and adjustments, then you're going to be able to come out of it in the space that you want to be, and you'll be able to really build other relationships and or repair that relationship. There's no guarantees, but that's the best thing that you can do is really focus on yourself. Great question. That's a great, and I also thought that's interesting transition about celebrating small wins. Very much our work is about playing the long game. Running the marathon, not the sprints. And so really learning to be able to celebrate the steps along the way in the process. Since I've been at this at Samuel Merritt for almost 16 years now, I've had some sense of how slow organizations move and change, but that I've seen some movement. And it is hard to see when you're in that 2 to 3 year rotation period on a campus. Oftentimes the change that you're inspiring, you don't ever get a chance to see. But when you're in a place in your life or at a position where you can stick around for a bit, you often see that all of those things that we're trying to do make a difference. And so really I've learned to just trust that the love that we're putting out in the world and the difference that we're making and the good hard work to improve the student experience on our campus makes a huge difference. And that while it may make a huge difference for an individual student right now, over the next couple of years, it's going to make a huge difference for a whole lot of students. And so trusting that. I think with that idea too of playing the long game is also reminding ourselves that our influence is often stronger with our teams and those teams nearest to us than it is kind of with teams that you don't work with or with institutional leadership and whatnot. Then it's when we remember that, then we're focused on we're building capacity for the institution. It's not just about my team, but it's my team with Shruti's team and the team next to us. And then we're really able to do some really strong work. But it's important in the middle of that work that we poke our heads up and go, oh, that was great. That was really nice. Great, good job, team. Yeah, I think one of my stories about that is it is learning it was a hard learning moment to celebrate the wins. And this is happening right now is we've got a department that is not wanting to partner with us very well. Even though we have similar goals for the institution and our work in terms of our student activities and programming and our leadership development, there's a key team next to us that hasn't yet come around, or we haven't found a way to really join as a team. And it's frustrating to the staff that are having to do a lot of the programming for our campus, that they're missing their partners, and so they're having to carry a bigger load, a bigger effort, and I'm still challenging them to say, I know that they're not showing up in the way that we want them to, and our part of who we are and part of the work we do will be to continue to ask them to join us. And I say that for me, that's important because I don't want us to settle into that bitterness spiral where we kind of write them off. We say they will never show up. They've never done anything for us. They're never going to show up. We're going to go do our own thing on our own. And so we have lots of conversations about how do you keep asking to partner and not be stuck in expectations so that you feel like your foot is slammed in the door every time you ask. But in those conversations, we're also able to identify the energy of us asking others to partner with us keeps us being focused on our students. And so this team is putting on amazing, powerful programs for our campus. Some of that's inspired because they're filling a gap that our partner hasn't been able to show up for. But part of that is that it allowed them to think more broadly than just what we do on our what their specific role is. When they view themselves as educators, they're starting to see themselves as educators now, and so that has freed them to put on some really exciting programs. And so it's I've had to practice really noting when those really excellent programs happen or they're a great idea, or even when I've seen them make a really good effort and there've been a slow movement with this other department. I say, hey, great job. Like, your work really paid off. Your investment in that relationship over the course of 3 years helped shift something, and they're starting to see it. And so really being able to take advantage of those things. I also think conversely, it's also learning to celebrate the small wins and your wins with your supervisor. This is really hard for me because I tend to be, let's go do good work and let's keep moving. Like, there's so many things that we want to tackle, and often my one-on-ones with my supervisor tend to be, here's some things, some issues that I foresee coming down the road, or here's a particular issue that we're trying to deal with right now, and I would need you to know, or I need some resources, or I need your political support and engagement. But very little of that is spent time to say, hey, I'm really proud of what we all did. And because I'm not doing that, it's not helping our team in two ways. One is that it's not helping my supervisor understand all of the really wonderful things that happened and all the people that were involved in that. I'm making some assumptions that they know, and I think sometimes they know most of it, but not all of it. And so I'm missing an opportunity to really showcase our area and the really good work that we're doing and celebrating our team. I think the other part about it is to really that I'm missing an opportunity to have that conversation about value, and for me to learn about the value that I have to my supervisor and to the institution. And because I'm taking it for granted that they know, and I'm not getting that feedback loop, that external feedback loop that I think is important. My internal gratification and pride about the work we do is important, but that external validation is good as well. Sorry about my light. You know, and I think this ties back into what Shruti talked about earlier too, about the self-worth, that it's to really celebrate, to chant, to use a mantra, to really say that I am enough. I matter here. I am worthy of love and good feedback. I'm worthy of recognition of the good work that I do, and I'm worthy of love even when I make mistakes, and that I don't get stuck in a shame spiral for when I foobar, when I flub things up. I think with that, it's also for when we start recognizing we're enough and we're celebrating ourselves, we're able to recognize where our boundaries are, and to be able to say, I've had enough. Like, I can't carry one more thing right now. I'm willing to jump in, but you're asking me to take one more thing, and I can't. I'm exhausted. I need help. Or can we identify somebody else to use this? And that is an empowering place to be able to work with our supervisors to find ways to solve problems without it having to be on our shoulders and our team's shoulders and where we carry the burden. Our students need us, and our students have a lot of needs, and so there's a lot of work to do. But how do we operate from a place of gratitude and fullness and bountifulness without collapsing under the weight of our good ideas and our good intentions. And I think kind of the celebrating wins is really practicing taking risks and being vulnerable. This is hard. in our perfection place about it's easy for us to go to that fear place to say that if I show imperfection, then I'm no longer valued at the institution and I'm going to be fired or let go or not get a promotion or not being given opportunities. And I think so. One of the conversations with staff is, if you're always making big mistakes, then maybe we're having a conversation about what needs to happen. But if you're doing great work along the way and we have a misstep, that's not going to mean the end of our time there. I still fall into that trap. And so that's where I say, like, us being able to have those conversations about wins with our supervisor helps fill that gap when I start to get self-defeating or worry that I'm not good enough and that I'm going to be let go at any time. I've learned from my own experience and kind of sorting through that and time in counseling also and conversations with great colleagues that when I'm taking care of myself and and feeling my worth internally, then I show up differently than I do when I'm feeling down on myself. And so when I'm able to do good work and when I'm able to be a really excellent part of a team, it's when I'm feeling confident and proud of who we are. I think with that, just one of our responsibilities as a supervisor is that knowing that other people are in that space too, and so how are we helping other people share their light so that they don't have to. Any ads, Shruti? Right. You're muted, Shruti, I think.
Yep, thank you. No ads, and thank you for that. I think Greg and I talk a lot about supervision, and we know that this work is hard. We know that relationships are imperfect, and we work really hard. Craig said our students' needs are plentiful, and so building teams and building relationships full of trust, full of worth, where we're celebrating one another and not competing with one another is really important. And it creates a better work environment, and in turn, it creates a larger impact on students. Craig, any ads?
No, I would agree. And I, just paying attention to time too. I know we're almost out of time. So, are there questions that we need to?
Yes, there was a question about an article that Trudy referenced earlier related to the value of peace and honesty.
Yeah, asking for a reference. I don't have that reference off the top of my head. Jeremy, if I can send it to you, could we add a slide with the references on it?
Certainly.
Okay, sorry about that.
No problem. Another question, how can you encourage your supervisor to use their voice when you notice and know they're not having confidence of the staff, for the staff?
Wow.
Yeah. It's a whole different webinar. I think one of the things that I've kind of approached those situations with is just hard facts and data. If they can't use their own voice, let the data kind of speak for the challenging spots or the spaces that they're stuck in. Because sometimes it's easier to present data and hard facts as opposed to opinions and anecdotal information. And I think the other piece of that is, has anyone had a conversation with their supervisor? I know it is so awkward and so hard, but what can we do to help you feel like you have a stronger voice? Or what can we do to set you up for success? And sometimes a supervisor needs to hear that because supervision is lonely and isolating. And so just sometimes building some community in that can be helpful.
Yeah. And I would add, I think sometimes it's also us saying to our supervisor, hey, this is what I need from you. Mm-hmm. I'm having this issue, and I need you to advocate for us in this way so that I can take care of this. And oftentimes that really more concrete part can along with the data can help.
Okay. We also have another question. How can you continue to motivate your staff to help pursue those long-term goals when they turn over every 2 to 3 years and won't necessarily see the success/outcomes of the goal?
Yeah, it's so some of that's training, some of that's really developing, crafting a vision and being able to articulate it to your teams as they change and as they rotate. I think it's helping them understand how it's showing them, working with them to help them see how their specific part connects to the whole. But I think it is, I think also just having those conversations, I think helps illuminate that our work is bigger and longer term.
I think too, if you built in a mentoring program where senior kind of folks can, like third, fourth, fifth year, can work with some of the newer folks, they can talk about changes that they've implemented and built versus just putting it on the supervisor to hold the history of the institution.
We've exhausted our questions list, but I'll kind of leave it open if anybody else has any additional questions. If you do have your mic set up, I can pass the mic to you if you raise your hand, or otherwise drop it in the questions box or the comment box. We have one. Over the course of your careers, what is 1 or 2 consistent strategies that you've used during your one-on-ones or other meetings to build trust and rapport?
So I think for me, I always ask about, I don't start with agenda items. I am always like, how are things going? What's going on? How's your partner? How's your dog? Starting with the personal stuff first has been more important to me. And the agenda items we will get to, but knowing that people bring that in, I think has helped. I mean, you'd have to maybe ask my team, but has helped create a sense of valuing and belonging for the folks I work with. And then I think not asking them to do things that I wouldn't do myself. And so that integrity piece has been really important. So what happens with this Greek life story is that I eventually, with one of our Res Life colleagues, took Greek life on together because I knew that was the decision that needed to be made. So doing things with humility and not knowing that I'm kind of above pulling weeds or moving furniture or anything like that.
Yeah. And I think with that, I think that it's about seeing them for who they are and not about for what they do for the institution. And so it's the work about building those relationships is not about that one-on-one moment. It's all the times you stop by and say, hey, and you ask about their partners and the dogs like Shruti talked about. But it's also, going, recognizing their birthday and finding ways like, let's go out to lunch or those kinds of things. That's how you see them. Or that's how they know that you see them, and that's how they feel valued, which then helps create trust around the work.
We had another question. You both touched on this a little bit before, but what advice do you have for white individuals who might struggle with building trust or relationships with supervisees of color?
Excellent question. We're writing a book on that right now. So,
All right.
But I think so my best advice about that is show up and identify the places that you're struggling. I think, well, first of all, I think it's naming it. I think being able to say in a relationship, hey, I know that there's some power differentials here. Both in terms of positionality, but race, gender, ability, religion, etc. Naming what those things are and say, it's important to me that we talk them through or notice them in the moment so that so we can minimize their impact in the work that we're doing. And I think being able to have those conversations matters. But I think kind of the personal part that feeds that is really doing your own work and knowing how your identities show up, and how, in my example, how I show up in whiteness, or how I show up in maleness, or how I show up in my ableness, and how that feeds the way I view the world. And so then when I'm able to pay attention to those things, then I can enter into conversations with Shruti or others of exploring whiteness or masculinity or whatnot in that relationship.
It sort of appears that we've exhausted our questions list, but I'll give it one last opportunity for any final questions. We do have one. How do you rebuild a trust with a supervisor that is the one who lost the trust of their subordinates, sorry. Let me reread that. How do you rebuild a trust lost when it's the supervisor that is the one who lost the trust of their subordinates?
I think you have to make a decision about how vulnerable you want to be, and why you're at that institution or why you're in that department. So how much do you want to trust this person again? What are you willing to put on the line? What are you willing to risk? And then, is that a situation that is repairable? I think for me, my job, 15% of my job, I worry about my supervisor and kind of what they're thinking. And there are days that we don't get along. There are days that I'm frustrated. But most of what I get my job satisfaction from is the change in the work that I'm doing for our students. And so, is there an opportunity for you to find meaning in a different way outside of that relationship with your supervisor?
Just giving it a second, just in case somebody's still typing.
Okay.
But in wrapping up, I'd like to thank you both for taking the time to talk to us this afternoon. All materials that were presented and any references will be included with this video on the GLCUHO website at glucuho.org under resources. You can continue this conversation beyond just this webinar, and you can come to the annual conference and meet with our contemporary issues expert, Dr. Desai. Any final words, Crystal or Dr. Elliott or Dr. Desai?
No, I just want to thank you both. You did great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all for this opportunity and for your time.
Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoon and have a great weekend.